Hey everyone, good afternoon. Hope you all had a wonderful lunch, not too bogged down by the food, but hope it was good. Hope it gave you some energy. I'm honored to be here presenting today on Edge Enhanced Web, and thank you for joining my session. I'm Rob Wakerly, Senior Director of Product Delivery at Edgio, and I want to tell you first a little bit about myself, give you a bit of an introduction. So I've spent my career in consulting. I've got about 15 years experience in technology and product. Started at Accenture, went to Slalom, and have worked on a variety of custom application development projects, mobile apps, web apps, ventured into cloud, DevOps as well. And I joined a company called Edgio about 2 years ago for their professional services team. So I lead a team of product managers there who are client-facing. We do implementation projects, welcome. And I want to talk to you about how the Edge can help your products and help your web technology. Let me tell you a bit more about Edgio and what Edgio does. So Edgio has the second largest private network in the world. This literally is fiber spanning the globe that handles heavy traffic for a variety of use cases. And any given day, Edgio powers about 5% of the global internet traffic. So what can you do with that? We've got that network, we've got platforms and other services and systems that make it easier to do these things in two main areas. One of those is media. So when you think about media like Disney+, streaming services, Netflix, we can use our network to help those companies get the content to their customers. And ultimately, we're trying to help them have better experience for their customers because we get it to them with lower latency, faster, and more consistency and reliability. You can use the same technology to enhance web applications and websites. So that's the team that I'm on. I work a lot with different companies, with web platforms, web apps, and help them get the most out of this kind of technology. And so being in expert services, my job is to work with projects, oversee projects with architects, engineers, and product managers. And so at Edgio, we've got a lot of large companies that we do work for. Many of these brands you probably recognize, United, Kate Spade, some others. But we can really help companies of any size, big to small. And this is a very useful service for almost any company size. All right, so for my presentation today, I wanted to walk you through how you can use the Edge for three main areas. That includes security, performance, and customer experience. And I'm going to walk you through what are some challenges and problems in each of those areas that are facing web technology, websites, web apps, and what are some solutions to those problems. Let's see here, having some issue. All right, there we go. So there's lots of areas to think about with modern tech, but there are important core priorities we should all care about. I've got some of them up on the slide here. Wait a minute. We don't want a presentation like this. Slow loading, boring, poorly delivered. Not a good experience for you all. You don't want an experience like that in the presentation. Why would you have a website like that? So we need to ask ourselves as product managers, how can we help control the experiences our folks are getting? And how many of you have experienced things like this with products and services and companies you've worked with? And so as product managers, we want to focus on some of these core things that are important to any experience, whether it's on the web, mobile app, et cetera. And so the things I'm going to walk through, again, with the problems and solutions, I'm going to talk a lot about in the e-commerce realm, because it's a great area that a lot of people can relate to. But also, I think there's going to be takeaways no matter what products you're working on and what kind of experience you're working on. So my goal for today is for folks to walk away with at least a nugget, hopefully a few, of things you can do with your products and techniques you can use to help improve your experience ultimately, because All these things, security, performance, and customer experience, they all relate to the customer experience. So again, I do feel these are core important priority areas that we all need to be thinking about, no matter what the modern tech is going on and where the industry is going. So let's dive into security. So security threats are growing, and there's some pretty staggering statistics out there and staggering on the slide that I want to point to. 74% of apps scanned this year have at least one high severity vulnerability that makes them vulnerable to security threat. There's approximately 50% of internet traffic now is from bots instead of human users. And if there's a data breach, 83% of consumers are likely to stop spending for some period of time with your product or your brand. And finally, the average cost of a data breach this year is $4.35 million. So there's a lot to lose. There's a lot of potential for cost and things to go wrong when it comes to security if you're not focusing on the right things and you're exposed. And by the way, I think I got to improve the security of my presentation as well. I must have left these slides over here. All right. Some of the other things I want to tell you about security. API security is an element of this. So by the year 2025, it's expected that 50% of data theft will be through APIs, unsecured APIs. On an average annual cycle, API-related loss is $12 to $23 billion. And there's some headlines here about major breaches that help illustrate why it's such a big deal and why we need to worry about this, not only as companies, but as product managers. Bots are also a big deal. So in addition to hackers trying to get into your product and site, there's 34% of all login attempts were from bots. And so they're probing, they're trying to penetrate, trying to get into your systems, figure out whatever kind of leverage they can get, steal some data, or do other nefarious activity. This may have even impacted some of you in your own lives. So do we have any Swiftie fans in here? By show of hands? All right. We've got a whole lineup there. Did you all know you were Swiftie fans and sat together? That's awesome. So some of you who are Swifties may have known, or even those of you who are not, because it made headlines. There are a lot of challenges with getting tickets. Did any of you try? Yeah? Did you get tickets? I did. Were you stuck in a waiting room for a while? Yeah? Okay. Wow. So part of what happened there is there were bad bots, and the people controlling them were motivated by the Taylor Swift tickets too. And they wanted to buy the tickets at retail value so that they could sell them later on the secondary market. And so these bots were tying up through these different means, trying to get into the store and do group purchases of these tickets and so forth. And that was a major contributor to what happened and to why it was so challenging to get the tickets. And so you can see this. It's most pronounced in scenarios like that, scenarios where maybe there's a limited release, maybe there's a cool shoe drop, Air Jordans or whatever. Yeah? You experienced that? What happened to you?
What was that drop? It was right before Christmas last year, the Lost and Founds.
Oh. And you got stuck in a waiting room or something?
Got kicked out 3 hours later, still.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yep. So there's some big profile things where this happens, but it can happen to everyday systems. It's not just these, special releases and drops. Not all bots are bad. So there's lots of really important bots, and the success of many companies relies on bots. The way Google works, they have crawlers. They crawl through the whole web to index and catalog the site. Those are bots. Those are good bots. Here's some other examples of good bots. Monitoring bots, you've got web analytics, bots that help you do other tasks, and many of which can help you as product managers. And then, of course, there's bad bots as well. Some of the ones we talked about, hampering the Swifties from getting what they want, and different hacks, fake account creation, account takeover, dedicated denial of service attacks, DDoS. So there's lots of things out there to watch out for. All right, I want to transition to some of the challenges around performance. So from a performance perspective, not everyone always thinks about performance, but everyone should be thinking about performance because it has a huge impression on how people view your site, the quality of the site, and whether they're likely to convert on your site. And so how many people here work on a site or product where you sell something? And sell, we'll use that in a very loose term. Maybe it's not, hey, I sell a product exactly, but okay, a lot of you. Maybe you're selling a meeting, right? Maybe you're selling a registration or a sign up, some kind of flow where someone comes to your site and they need to complete this process, maybe fill out a form, submit it to get a meeting, et cetera. So those all have an element where this matters. It's not just pure retail or e-commerce. But some things I want to point out here, 47% of users expect a page to load in under 2 seconds. 79% of shoppers that are dissatisfied are less likely to buy again with you. And 52% of shoppers say a quick load time is important to loyalty that they have with that brand. You can see many of the other statistics here as well. Slow performance is associated with poor conversion, high bounce rates, and they don't shop as much. So they spend less time on your site, they don't shop as much, all bad things if you're trying to get customers to complete whatever it is they came there to do or to purchase. And so speed matters now more than ever as well. Some people behave differently, right? Do we have anyone here who would consider themselves particularly gregarious or social, a real people person? Do we have any of those in the crowd? Yeah. So one of you, if you hear about some new product and you want to find out about it, what do? You probably call up your friend or call up your mom. Hey, I heard about this thing. What's going on with this? Can you tell me about you? You've got to hear about this. Do you do that, or what's your style?
Sometimes you just go on social media too and you find some new updates.
Yeah. Yeah. So you find a social way to do it. Well, the rest of us, we Google it. So in the past, speed was something that, hey, it affected people when they came to your site. You want to make the most of the traffic that's on your site when they get there. So it related to engagement, some of the things I already mentioned, conversion rate, et cetera. If you wanted more traffic, buy ads. Now, speed is increasingly important to SEO. It's important to how do you get that traffic in the first place. And so now speed not only equals engagement, but it also relates to that awareness and traffic because it has an impact on the organic traffic that you receive from Google. So I want to talk a bit about Core Web Vitals. Who here is aware or familiar with Google Core Web Vitals? All right, great. So we've got a few folks in the room. I want to walk you through because I think it's worth going into some detail here. So a few years ago, Google came out with this Core Web Vitals definition. This is a component to search engine optimization and search ranking. And so the 3 Core Web Vitals are largest contentful paint, which basically is perceived performance of your page. So it stands for largest contentful paint because it looks at what's the largest piece of content on the page above the fold and how long in seconds does it take to load. And so a passing score here is under 2.5 seconds. First input delay is from the moment you start trying to tap, touch, scroll, or use your mouse on that page, how long does it take to respond to that action? And you want this to be fast as well. So passing score is under 100 milliseconds. And then finally, cumulative layout shift is how much does that page shift and jump up and down or side to side as it's loading. And so particularly if you're on the web, you're looking at some tabloids, maybe something a little raunchy. We all know those sites, right? They jump around a lot. And you're trying to, oh, let me read about this, let me click that. And an ad pops up, where it shifts on the page and sticks something under your finger, and now all of a sudden you're in some other page and they're sending you elsewhere, right? Who's experienced that? Yeah, most of us. That's okay. That's fine. So that jumping around is cumulative layout shift. It doesn't have like a, seconds or whatever, but they have their own scale and the passing score is under 0.1. So beyond some of you knowing what these are, who has measured these for their product or site and kind of know how you're scoring? All right, cool. That's great. Do you have a particular frequency that you track this or measure it, or do you have it on some regular dashboard? Anyone able to comment on that?
I look at it weekly because I'm a consumer product manager, and so we just make sure that we look at it for mobile mostly, and then desktop's kind of lagging behind. We don't pay much attention to that.
Yeah. And is that because the majority of your traffic is mobile? Yeah, that makes sense. That's great. Any other comments?
After release,
After each release?
we monitor on a weekly basis for sure. And then we also have alerts if it goes to certain threshold.
Nice. That's great. Cool. Well, that's great. Any site where you are particularly concerned about the customer experience, especially if it's a high traffic site, it's a tier 1 type workflow supported by the pages on that site, I would highly recommend look at your core of vitals. Yeah.
I don't have experience in this space. I'm hearing you, I'm seeing images of mobile, and I'm reading web. So I'm curious as far as, do these metrics or thresholds change based on the platform?
So these are all web metrics only.
Okay.
There's probably analogs from a mobile app, native mobile app perspective, but these are based on websites. And so you're seeing mobile, this is thinking about like mobile web. Yeah, great question. All right, so obviously performance is a component. Talked a little bit about why they matter. Again, people Google a lot of stuff. 43% of e-commerce traffic comes from Google search as opposed to a paid channel or a social channel or direct channel. So even if you're not in e-commerce, Google is probably an important traffic source for you. So think through that, think about that, what impact this might have for your product and your business. The top 3 organic search results get a 55% click-through rate. So again, it goes to show that SEO is important, page ranking is important. These are all a part of that. And then finally, passing Google Core Web Vitals is associated with 24% less page abandonment. So another reason why you should consider optimizing. And speed matters a lot as well. Again, if you have anything to do with sales on your site, for retail, travel sites, you can see here a 0.1 decrease in the time it takes in seconds for your page to load can have a huge impact on the conversion rate of your site. So you can see there are about 10% better conversion for a travel site just by reducing your speed by 0.1 seconds. It's also associated with higher average order values. People shop more, they add more to their cart, they buy more, and also increased page views. Obviously, performance is not the only factor to user experience. There's a lot more, and there's a lot in your control. So again, sticking on with e-commerce, but a lot of this should be related to other industries as well. And what I wanted to enforce here is that there's a lot of things within your control. Sure, some of the top ones, this was a multi-selection questionnaire where it said basically, what caused you not to complete the checkout process? And people could select one or more of these. So for any of the math people in the room, you probably saw right away, hey, this doesn't add up to 100%. So some of the top things there that you can control, they didn't trust the site with their credit card information. So if your site is glitchy, buggy, poor performance, there could be a lot of reasons why they didn't trust it, right? But find out what that is and see what you can do from a user experience perspective to improve it. Too long or complicated checkout process, 18%. A lot of other things here that are within your control. Issues seeing costs up front. They felt there were surprise costs. So that's something very solvable. Present that information earlier, transparency in pricing. And there's a Forrester study. You could have up to a 200% improvement in conversion rate by improved user experience. So hopefully that talks about, hopefully you see why some of these things are so important from the aspect of security, performance, and user experience. Those are some of the challenges and problems. Now I want to talk about how can you use Edge and some other techniques to solve it. So I want to talk about what is a typical web process today. So your user, again, mobile web, or it could be desktop. They say, hey, I want to check out this shirt. And it goes to the browser. Maybe some of that web page they're requesting is in the browser cache, serves some of the content from there. And then anything pulls from the data center and or the database to help populate the page as it loads. It has to make each one of these jumps to get the data back to the user and say, here's your page. Here's all the stuff you wanted. A lot of steps. And so as an alternative, I'd like to introduce CDN. Who's heard of a CDN before? And, all right, great, a lot of you. I'll be honest, I learned what this was only a couple of years ago. And after so many years in technology, I was surprised at how much I didn't know about CDN and content delivery networks. So a CDN is basically a set of network servers that are distributed across the globe, and they help you deliver digital content. It's exactly the name, Content Delivery Network. So there's lots of different reasons why you might use a CDN. I want to talk a little bit about how it works. So unlike that traditional website view where it goes through each of those steps, a CDN will cache and store different information for you as an intermediary closer to your customer. And this concept is not new. Maybe it's newish for digital realm. I think they've been around for 15, 20 years. But if you think about other industries, things like manufacturing, when you order shampoo or deodorant, that product, when it gets to your house, it wasn't shipped from the Procter & Gamble factory direct to your house, right? They've got a distribution network and wholesalers and retail locations. If you're getting it through Amazon, it's coming through a warehouse or something like that to your house. They have their own network to deliver that physical product to you more efficiently, more effectively to handle those aspects of the delivery. Similarly, newspapers. You don't get a newspaper shipped and thrown on your driveway straight from the printing press, right? They have a whole network of drivers, and they might drop a pallet of the newspapers off at different locations around the city, around the country. They distribute it all around the country, same day, right? And so it comes down to those drivers and delivery folks and everything to get that out. It's a distribution network. The same thing is true for digital assets with CDN. So when you think about how this works, the user requests information. They request a web page, for instance, and that has certain content on it. And instead of going all the way back to your origin server, which may be across the country or even on another continent, depending on where your company is and the user is, it will have a copy of most of that information at the POP, or the point of presence. And so these are globally distributed around the world. A large company that does CDN, they might have a few hundred POPs globally. So you would want one in Boston, New York City, Atlanta, Ohio, and so on. So they're all around. And so that wherever your users are, you are ready to serve them and deliver those digital assets to them. So that's why it's so important for media companies when you're streaming. You don't want buffering on Netflix. You don't want it to take forever to load. That latency, every little bit matters. And so if you're getting it from 20 miles away, going to be much faster than 500 miles away. And so you probably guessed it already. What are some of the advantages to CDN? Well, security, performance, user experience. It's very key to a fast and responsive site. It can help you with reliability, high availability. And so instead of relying on your host platform servers, whether they're in the cloud, on-premise, hybrid, you have this network that can help you get the content and information distributed. This works particularly well for industries that really care about performance. So think about gaming, think about e-commerce, media we keep talking about. And so really any kind of experience that relies on really good experience for your customers, I would recommend it for those situations as well. Because even from a productivity perspective, very large companies even that have internal tools, maybe they're not selling something, but if you can save thousands and thousands of people seconds every time they use a tool, maybe it's every week, every day, it's going to save time and increase productivity. So how does it work for security? From a standpoint of security, the CDN is a great place to build in security. Excuse me. That wasn't part of the presentation, I promise. So remember, there's good bots, bad bots. We talked about the impact of some of these things. These are ways that you can integrate security at the edge and into those POPs that will help you secure your whole experience and your systems. So things like access controls, right? Making sure users who are coming to your page have access to the content and information they're requesting. Security at the API level, making sure that that's managed through this way. Rate limiting. So if there's a bad bot saying, hey, give me 1,000 Taylor Swift tickets, they're rate limited. Nope, you can't have 1,000 sessions going with this site to buy all those tickets. We're not going to let you do that. Advanced bot manager. You can't always tell what's a good bot, what's a bad bot, unless you have some kind of bot manager. And so that will help you determine how do you handle these different threats and what kind of rules, what kind of custom or managed security rules do you implement to help control those different things. For instance, maybe you don't know that something is a bad bot, but you have some reason to believe that it is. That manager will detect that, and instead of just outright blocking it, it can serve a CAPTCHA or something that a bot wouldn't be able to complete. You know, one of those little annoying things where it's like, click the boxes that have a school bus in them. Yeah.
I mean, this is brilliant. Thank you so much for this topic. With regard to the CDNs, I have a website, and it's, you know, I'm a small business.
Do you want to use the mic?
Oh, dear.
I think you're loud enough, but just in case.
Okay. Well, my mom says I'm loud enough, so. So I did a performance check on my website, and it said, you can increase blah, blah, blah performance by installing a CDN. And I'm like, I'm one product, you know, I'm a small shop, I'm just me. Does it ever not make sense to install some of these things? I recognize that these things can scale up, but if you're just so tiny, would it ever make sense to do some of these things?
I think it depends, right? It's hard for me to answer other than it depends. Obviously, there's a cost to these types of services and these types of tools. So it depends on what's the value of your site. If it's a revenue-making site and you can put some numbers to it and say, hey, this site brings in $200,000 a month in revenue, and if I risk being down X amount of time because of a bot attack, might bring me down for half a day or a day, how much lost revenue would I have? You can start to compute the ROI by asking yourself questions like that and balance that against the cost of like one of these bot management products, which might be a few $1,000s a month. So I can't sit here and quote you, but some of these products are more expensive than others. CDN, you know, you're not talking tens of thousands of dollars to get that service. So if you have a reasonable amount of traffic, I think it would be something at least worth looking at. You could get a quote. Okay. So talking about bots, the basic framework is you want a tool that can do these three things: monitor for bots, detect bots, and then protect. Again, by serving the appropriate action, whether it's a full-on block or it's, hey, we'll serve a CAPTCHA or something else that can help mitigate what we think is a bot. But if it's really a human, we can let them through because they can pass the test. This is representative. So 12 million requests 49% of the traffic in this illustrative example is from humans. And you can see some of the breakdown of the other bots that are coming. So some of them, again, good bots, search engine, but then there's other things like brute force and credential stuffing where they're trying to hack in fake account creation and so on. So the threats are very real. There's a lot of traffic out there that you have to watch out for. And from working at Edgio, there's a couple data points there that we have 25,000 daily DDoS attacks that we block. So it's a big thing out there. Lots of people are getting attacked on a regular basis, whether they know it or not. I want to talk about WAP. So how many of you know what a WAP or WAF is in security? Great. So this stands for Web and API Protection. Talked a bit about the API leaks and issues before. I consulted with our security team. These were a few of the things that they said to look for in a WAP if you want to have a dev-friendly service and system. So as product managers, you're probably not going to be managing all these things, right? But I want to help educate people on what are some of the things to be aware of and what are some of the things you might engage in conversation with your technical counterparts, architects, engineers on the team. The other thing I would suggest is as a product manager, you may have your team implementing a lot of third-party libraries. You may have integrations with other systems, other companies and tools, and start thinking about security. If you're not already thinking about this, think about what kind of requirements do I need to put for these other tools that involve security. So how are you vetting them? Are they safe and secure? What are their security policies as a third party? Because if you're integrating with them, great, they may provide you a lot of value, but they could also be exposing you if you're not careful and you're not looking out for those aspects. So instead of the traditional website process, what does it look like with a traditional CDN? You've got a request. It might get some of the information from the browser's cache, and then it can get as much as it can from a traditional CDN. So the content that is stored at the edge, it'll pull that, and anything that it doesn't have, it will still go to the data center and database if necessary. But generally, you want to increase the amount that is coming from that CDN cache because that's going to help you with performance. And then beyond that, there's even advanced CDN features, something called prefetch. And so what prefetch does is, let's say you're shopping on a site, you are looking at a list page, maybe I'm shopping for winter coats. Maybe someone else is thinking about that this time of year, winter's coming up, right? And so I'm looking at a list of different winter coats. Chances are I'm probably gonna click one of them, right? And so what this capability does is it says, hey, we want to start getting that information before you even click it. So it can start to pull some of the data on that next page so that by the time you do click it, it may already have all the information and boom, it loads it like that because it's loaded it into your browser. And so what you start to get is a native-like app experience on the web. And so this can help increase transition times from page to page. And so there's a few companies out there that do this kind of predictive prefetch, and cache hit rate, something you want to look at of how much of my experiences are being served from the cache, because that's going to be a faster service, are coming that way. So you get some benefit with any CDN, and then it can be even higher with a CDN with this built in as well. And so you can see average paint times. You can even get down to sub-second transition or page load times. So there's a maturity to all of this from a performance perspective. And on the left crawl, implement a CDN. Also do image optimization. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. In the center, some more advanced CDN features like prefetching. And then you also want to consider your architecture, right? CDN isn't tied to your architecture, but the CDN can do more with certain architectures. If you have a headless or a service-oriented architecture where you have APIs and things broken out in different layers, that's easier to cache than a monolithic system. So many companies that build their own technology probably already on these kind of architectures. But if you buy things off the shelf, it may be more of a monolithic architecture, and you might be a little bit more limited. And then finally, how do you run? How do you go as fast as possible? Get your cache hit rate up, do the optimizations, make sure you're passing Google Core Web Vitals, and at that point, you're going to be able to provide a great experience performance-wise to your customers. One of the biggest issues from performance is having heavy pages. And so if you have marketing folks who aren't aware of this, they might be uploading 12 megabyte images for your pages. And so when your customers try to load that, it's going to take a while. Make sure that they're not doing that, or get an image optimizer solution or tool, because it'll reduce it down to the point where it's still beautiful. You can still have great editorials and layouts, product information and content on your site, but it's not going to bog it down. You can see 80% plus size decrease from doing this activity. We talked a lot about caching, and I want to dive in on that topic because a lot of people might think, well, okay, I've got some text, some images, but what about the rest of my site? You know, not everything is just a blog. But I'm here to tell you that you can cache that kind of static content, but also dynamic content too. And so when you get into it on a granular level, as a product manager and as technical folks on your team as well, can think about how long do I want to cache this piece of data or information. Something, we've got a Four Seasons Resort page here. So the header, you probably aren't changing your header a whole lot. Maybe you cache that and you let the CDN hang on to that for a day or a week. You can granularly set those caching rules to say, after a day, refresh it, you know, pull the latest and put that in your cache CDN. The room image, maybe you have that for a month. Things like pricing, lots of people have dynamic pricing. You can set cache limits as low as, you know, minutes. So maybe you cache that for 10 minutes, 30 minutes. How often is your pricing coming out? How often is your content being refreshed? And so you can set those time limits for those different aspects, depending on what it is on your site. And so with that, again, the more you're caching, it'll help support your performance. We talked about user experience. Smart design leads to better performance. I view the design and UI of the page and performance, they're complementary, because you can come up with a design that may look pretty, but it could bog down performance. So you need to be thinking about both with your user experience. UX obviously is important. So many people look about their first impression of a site is based on the website design. And so there's lots of upside here as well. And again, a lot of this doesn't have to do with CDN. It's just in general going to help you with your ROI of the investments you put on your site, the conversion rate, and those other business KPIs. Something that I've learned that I'm pretty excited about is how can you dive into some of the nuances. So hopefully you're measuring performance. We heard some great examples of folks in the room who are doing that. And how else can you do this from an analytics perspective? So once you've optimized your site and your page flows and you have analytics on that, you can start to look at different segmentation, because sometimes there could be defects or issues from performance or bugs on your site in these different segments. So by looking into the data, maybe you have Google Analytics or another analytics tool. By segmenting, you can look at reports by device type, by operating system, browser, and often what you'll find is, hey, I've got a 20% bounce rate on Android. That looks okay. But my bounce rate is 40% on Apple. What's going on there? And so if you see some anomalies where one is way better or worse than the other, that's a good sign that you have an issue. And we've even seen nuanced issues where maybe you have paid social and maybe all the users coming from Instagram to your site are having an issue. There's an error or a bug on the page. Now, a lot of us do device testing on different browsers, on different devices, but you can't test every single combination. I mean, you can try, but if you think about every permutation here across these, that's like 4 different variables, you're going to be testing all day. And maybe you have automation, but it's hard to test every single one of these elements. So particularly for the areas where you have a significant amount of traffic, maybe 5% or more, you want to be looking at the metrics for bounce rate, conversion, any of those key business metrics that affect your site and your experience, and be digging in to make sure that they all seem fairly on par with each other. Otherwise, it may be an indicator there's a problem. Who's done funnel analysis before for your site or products? Lots of folks. Okay, cool. This is the last main topic I wanted to cover. I'll go through it fairly briefly since it seems like a lot of you have done this before. Again, sticking with e-commerce, but figure out what's the flow for your site, what are the key use cases you care about, map them out, look at the metrics. So this supposes 120,000 views to the site, subset will shop, a subset of that will view products, create a cart, check out, place the order. This is percentages of what are the drop-offs. So for example, of the 75,000 who view a product, 11,000 create a cart. That's 14%. I found this great guide, which you can Google, or I've got the link in the presentation you can find afterwards. But it says, hey, these are stretch goals. And so that if you have an e-commerce site, these are stretch goals for percentages that you might want to measure and look at, because if you're not reaching these percentages, try to, or see how you can improve it. So the idea here and why I'm talking about this is it can help guide you of where to prioritize, where to focus. And so depending on your site and what are your workflows, if it's not a shopping flow, try to understand what's a good industry benchmark for that, how am I performing against that, and measure these things over time. And so you can measure how does it change after each subsequent release. You definitely want to look at before and after. And then you can even do other things like split testing, obviously A/B testing, probably many people are familiar with. So different techniques of how can you hone your conversion, how can you hone where's my site working well, not well, and get those feedback loops coming to help drive the work that you're doing on your site. And so in this case, you can see of the folks who create a cart, basket, and then go to checkout, this site is only achieving 22.7%, whereas the recommended goal is 60%. Again, that's more of a stretch target, but that's the biggest area that's off. And so, that's a good area to do some more analysis and digging. Here's a few resources for you. We talked about performance. These are some free tools that you can use: Page Speed Insights, Web Page Test, the Chrome User Experience Report, which gives you your core web vitals for trailing 28 days for your site. These are all good tools. I recommend adding these into your process if they're not already, not only for your production site, but for release candidates. So you can even measure the performance of your release candidate before it launches with certain tools. And you can use that as a predictor to say, is this release candidate improving my performance, making it worse? And so before it's even live, you can be looking for that performance. And finally, I want to point to some very real results. So primarily through different optimization techniques, you can see these results from projects we've done. So at Coach, we did LCP improvement and achieved a 45% improvement in the largest contentful paint. And that resulted in 76% increase in revenue per visitor. We can see increases to organic traffic at Shoe Carnival, and increases in conversion rate at Universal Standard. And so these weren't any new features added to the site. It was purely speed and doing a split test traffic to say 50% to the old slow experience, 50% to the new fast experience. How did they compare? And what does that conversion rate look like in those different experiences? So it's pretty amazing what some of these things can do. And I want to point out as well that you don't improve it and then you're done. You have to stay on top of it, continuously measure it, keep a pulse on it, because things can stray off course over time. So definitely be aware of that. A few ideas of next steps. Think about how are these topics I presented to you today important to your product, to your teams. Some very tactical things. Run a performance test. Look into Core Web Vital optimization. Think about your caching and prefetching strategy and some of the other areas that you can see here. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking with you today. Thanks for all of those who spoke up, had questions, and participated. Thank you so much. How are we doing on time? A few minutes?
4 minutes officially.
Any questions or comments? Yeah.
I had a question about like kind of the source of truth, like regarding edge. So let's say we had like 50 pops for an enterprise system. Where does the source of truth lie in the sense across all the pops? Like, is it decentralized or is there any centralization there? Just kind of like an example, let's say I want to do a cybersecurity enhancement and push it out. How is which node and out of all the pops know what the source of truth is and can validate that? And also with that, like latency and so forth, like is there increased cost for that with having to continue like listen for those updates and stuff?
Yeah. I know that there's lots of complex algorithms to keep all of them in sync from a content perspective. And so if the data is cached and sitting in a POP, it basically assigns it a timestamp. And so when you think about when is this data up to date as of, and when do I need to refresh it based on your caching rules, it'll respect that and make sure that you pull the latest content and information from the origin when your cache has expired. So I can't tell you in detail how exactly all that works, but it will keep it in sync across all the points of presence and POPs. And then the other part of your question about the cybersecurity and like rules, I'm thinking just in general, like how do you set different rules and apply them? How does that roll out? Is that kind of the nature of what you're talking about? So like with all of these things, when you have different rules or different things, there's a propagation time. And so certain technology, many of you know, right? You publish an update, maybe you have a content management system, you publish an update, you can't go to the site the next second and see it. And so propagation of different systems is different times. The CDN at Edgio has a propagation time of about 1 minute though. So if you want to publish a new security rule, it's quite fast for it to roll out. Some other systems take longer, 15, 30 minutes or even longer, like DNS changes, I know sometimes can take a long time. Yeah.
So many companies these days going into cloud-based solutions, right? So they're hosted in an AWS environment, and then how Azure comes in place.
Yeah.
To generate that same performance.
So the interesting thing about CDN is it's complementary. So you don't have to replace any of the existing tech stack that you're doing to get benefit out of it. Certain tech stacks will benefit more from it because it's easier to cache that content. But whether you're hosting in the cloud with AWS or Azure or Google, or you're hosting on premises on your own servers, you can still, whatever that origin is, you can still put a CDN in front of it and interface with it. Yeah, it goes through the internet as typical protocols.
But a lot of those cloud services, they do offer similar
Yeah.
toolings and so forth.
Yeah, like AWS has a CloudFront service. What you find is there's a lot of kind of mass solutions out there. Like AWS has a CDN you can get through them. It doesn't have some of the bells and whistles and functionality. It may not be as vast or large because they do so many different things. So you can see variation in the service level. What else? Yeah.
So it's good to see the conversion rate in the more e-commerce side or whatnot. Like, how do you match that with not the e-commerce side, but more for experience side? And how does that play very similar important role with like?
Yep. So the things that I think are underlying are speed. You can measure the speed, right, consistently, no matter what kind of site it is. You can measure how impacted are you by security issues, and are you hacked or not, or is the rate of detection of the bad bots and traffic, are you detecting more and therefore able to mitigate and prevent more? So those are a few pieces of data that you can use as stepping stones to what are the KPIs I care about for this site. And so, like you say, different sites care about different things. So try to translate how do those things of speed and security relate back to the other business metrics. And if I saw a 1-second page load performance improvement, what did that do to my other business KPIs? Maybe it'll have a big impact, medium impact. And so you can try to figure out that correlation. Anything else? All right, yeah.
I was just gonna ask one more. I know you talked about like kind of the, I wouldn't say latency, but the cache time, like 1 minute, I think. I was curious, like with like critical infrastructure, like kind of what that may look like and how Edgeo would support that. Like let's say I'm a brokerage firm and I need to make sure every market supply and demand and price of something is coming in on the fly consistently, it's reliable, and the price doesn't change across the system. How would something like that work?
Yeah. The use cases, you don't use this technology for everything. So I think of like high-speed trading. And so while this kind of technology can make it fast for you to load, it is cached information. And so high-speed trading, you're relying on your information being milliseconds old or less. And so there may be a play there where the fast network can help get it there faster because like we support Thursday Night Football, for example, and that's live, right? That's live. You need up-to-date information. So maybe there are certain use cases, but if what you're really after is like the most up-to-date information, it may not be the best use case for that. So I think those high-speed trading companies and platforms, they don't use a CDN. They have like their own bespoke infrastructure and networks that connect like right in where all the systems are right next to each other and they're close to Wall Street or wherever the firm is. Well, thank you. You've been a great audience. Appreciate it. And can we give a round of applause as well to the organizers and our hosts? It's been a great event. Thanks again for joining.